Yes. Again, hello, good morning, Sitaram, and welcome to another program in the series, Addiction and Recovery. I would like to welcome all our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Tobago, up the Caribbean, and worldwide who are listening and following this program on the various social media platforms. And to let you know, this program is being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube and Facebook soon after its completion this morning. It will also be repeated on radio and TV Jagriti at 10 p.m. tonight. So those of you who are unable to listen to it now in its entirety, you can tune in again or you can go to YouTube and access the information. And before you run off this morning, I want to let you know I'm going to be speaking about a very important topic this morning that is of interest to all human beings, especially those who are addicted to gambling. So that this program is intended to educate and so that gambling, drug addiction, they're all interrelated, and these are all recognized as addiction as a disease by the World Health Organization, indeed by our local health authorities as well. But these are diseases of denial. So that what it means is that the people who actually become addicted to gambling or to drugs, they use a defense mechanism called denial so that they can continue to live with themselves and rationalize and, without feeling too much shame and guilt. But as a result of that, they are less likely to want to sit in and listen to programs like these. And I'm speaking from experience because a lot of times when organizations organize lectures at churches, at temples, and so on, and they invite speakers like myself to speak on addiction, drug addiction, and the various types of addiction, you'll find it does not generate a lot of interest because of this denial syndrome. The people who are alcoholic and drug addicts, they're less likely to come because they are not too happy letting other people know that they have a problem with either drugs or some behavioral addiction. And their families as well, they would rather keep it in house and not let anybody know that one of theirs has a problem. So that a lot of times you'd find that just the organizers are present and a few other people like myself who are working in the field. And this is why this program is so important because you can use it as a resource. You can send a link to someone who you believe might have a problem with drug addiction or gambling or smoking or any one of these um, behavioral problems. And I know from experience working in the field that if you send it to them they in their quiet moments, in the privacy of their home, some of them actually go sit in the toilet and read the information on addiction or look at their phone because deep down, everyone, alcoholics and drug addicts are not foolish people. They use it cuts across all barriers, of status and financial standing and all of that, so that you'd find a lot of people know they have a problem, but they want to keep it a secret. They don't want anybody to know. That is what denial is about. But they would look at the information, not in the open, not in the public, but they would look at the information and they may not respond right away. But one day, when, like we say in Trinidad, water more than flour, they will remember that there was a Mr. Dwarika or there was someone who cared about me, who shared this information with me. And it is a message of hope. It let them know that there is a place they can go if they have a problem and that help is always available. So this morning, I want to speak about gambling. Last week, I spoke about vaping, and there was a tremendous response from a lot of people, young people, and so on, and people in the field. And today, I want to speak about gambling because, you know, the question is gambling entertainment? Some people see it as entertainment, but is it a way to entrapment that eventually you get trapped in a cycle of gambling? So, again, I want to welcome all our brothers and sisters, wherever you are, and if you have comments, you can post it on YouTube. You can call the numbers on your screen after the program, and I would be quite willing. So today I want to explore a topic that affects all individuals, families, and communities across Trinidad and Tobago, and that is gambling. Because not only the person who is gambling is affected, remember, especially if that person is the head of the household or the mother in the house, and the resources are being spent that could be appropriated to other purposes. So, what might begin as a harmless entertainment can, for many, become a silent and destructive force. Now, just like alcohol, not everybody who drink or everybody who gamble will become addicted, but everybody who became addicted, they started with that simple form of entertainment, recreational drinking or gambling. So that behind the excitement lies financial hardship. Then this leads to sometimes broken relationships. I have seen that in my practice. I have counseled a lot of people who have had problems with gambling. And sometimes by the time they reach to me, they already separated, divorced, and separated from their children, lost their homes sometimes, lost their jobs, and all of that. So it could lead to broken relationships with spouses, with relatives, with siblings, and so on. And, or, of course, emotional distress. And increasingly, these all lead to addiction in the end. Now, how do you tell whether you're an addicted? And we're going to deal with all of that this morning. So today I want to ask, when does gambling become dangerous? I want to ask these questions and I want to answer them before the end of the program. What are the benefits and the risks? We are going to look at this in a very balanced way. It is not that I want to scapegoat gambling, but we need to look at it honestly and objectively. And how do we protect ourselves and our loved ones? So stay with us. Now, I want to talk a little bit, bring it home, gambling in Trinidad and Tobago. Gambling is part of everyday life in Trinidad and Tobago. I grew up hearing about Playway and the bankers and the punters and all of those things. At the community level, there is Playway. And then later on, we had lotto and scratch tickets. And now you have sports betting. Someone told me, on the IPL, people are betting not only on the game, not only on a match, but there are people who are betting on every ball, whether the person is going to score or not score, whether they're going to get out or not out, whether they're going to get a four or a six. And so you have sports betting. And then they have slot machines, of course, in bars and in private clubs. There is also online gambling. There are various platforms that offer online. So even though you might try as much to restrict the person, some people are able to do it in the privacy of the overnight while you're asleep. They're putting in the bets and so on, and they're using the credit card and all of that. So it is very difficult to really recognize it. So that the gambling industry now, on the one hand, it generates billions of dollars annually, and illegal gambling is believed to even be larger than the legal gambling because of no taxes are involved and all of that. The bankers don't have to pay any taxes to government and all of that. And that has been there even before the structured legalized gambling platforms. So this makes gambling not just a personal issue, but a national concern. Across Trinidad and Tobago, gambling has become normalized in many communities. For some, it is occasional entertainment. And that is how it starts off, weekend holidays. I remember in the old days, uh, around, there would be for New Year's, the Santa Rosa races and all of that. People will go to it, became big occasion. But for others, it quietly becomes a dangerous dependency. And I had a colleague when I worked at Cora Hospital, Dr. Austin, who actually wrote his thesis on gambling. And in the body of it, he's suggesting that gambling can be compared to all other addictions, even alcohol and drug addiction, because the prognosis and the diagnosis and everything is the same features. So that let us first look at the merits of gambling. I don't only want to scapegoat and criticize it and demonize gambling. Let us look at what are some of the benefits. If we do not understand this, we will not understand why it leads to what it eventually becomes. So let us begin with a balanced perspective. Yes, gambling provides entertainment. For many people, gambling provides an excitement, it provides relaxation, and it is recreational. And people talk about it, and you have the smaller games of chance. You have bingo that are even used for the churches to raise funds. There are raffles that raise money for charitable causes, for organizations and so on to raise money. You even have certain games of chance that are used to raise money for good uh, causes, so that gambling in itself can has become an industry in Trinidad and Tobago. It contributes to job creation. All those people who work in the casinos and all of that now, services, slot machines, yes, it generates a certain amount of jobs. And then it also generates a lot of revenue, government revenue. And I know the National Lotteries Control Board is making a lot of money without having to put out too much out there. And they do make contributions to national to organizations that charitable organizations as well that serve the national interest, that provide some social services and so on. Um, there is also the whole question of social bonding. Friendly betting and gaming activities can strengthen social interaction. And I mean, if we bring it to community level, I've seen at wakes, for instance, instances like that where people come to play card, and somewhere in someone in the corner you'll have people playing poker and people playing different games, gambling. There are different card games that they play, and there's an investment in terms of gambling in these. Yes, some people just do it for fun, and that's the end of it. So, friendly betting and gaming activities can strengthen social interaction. And then there's legal gambling, which can support public initiatives and services. Example, National Lotteries Control Board. However, these benefits only exist when gambling remains controlled, when it is done in a responsible way, and when it is only occasional. And some people have the discipline where they can, you know, put aside, okay, I have this $20, I'm going to play with that or whatever. And when that's finished, that's finished. And then I only do it on certain occasions, well, okay, when the occasion arrives, and so on. So there's some amount of control. But as I said earlier on, that is how a lot of people begin. Not all will progress to addiction, but some of them will. Because underlying it, there's always underlying addiction is the inability to postpone gratification. That is, we want to feel good and we want to feel good right now. And I will speak about that another time in more detail. But now let us turn to the risks, you know, the real cost of gambling. Gambling addiction, known as gambling disorder, it is listed in our DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual, that is used in the psychiatric services as a disorder, just like alcoholism, just like all the other uh, mental illnesses. So there's gambling disorder, and this is recognized as a mental health condition. All right, so what are some of the characteristics of this mental health disorder? You have many individuals who lose savings that were accumulated sometime through inheritance. You know, and there's a saying, a lot of people who do not know how it comes, they didn't have to work hard for it. It's not difficult for them to blow it out. You understand? But even people who work hard for it and saved up over the years and cherish their savings, they feel a sense of security because of the savings that they have. When they gamble and they lose it, it leads to chasing where they want to win it back because now they feel insecure. And we'll speak a little bit more about that as the morning develops. And so there's not only a loss of savings, but in the addiction, what happens over time, there's an accumulation of debt. And I have in several sessions here with people who have become addicted to gambling have to really work hard at getting them to disclose. When you look at the long list of people that they borrowed from, they, re, they refinanced house loans without even letting the wife or the husband know. You know, they borrowed money and from people who are loan sharks, and now they can't pay it back. So there's an accumulation of debt because they borrow excessively. And I'll speak about why. Some of them actually start selling their possessions, heirlooms and jewelry and whatever they can convert into cash to go back and bet. And of course, these things, when you live with these situations, these stressors, it lead to mental health consequences. So that gambling addiction is linked to depression, to anxiety, to emotional instability. And all of these can lead to serious concerns for the individual and the family. Oftentimes, these things, of course, can lead to conflict in the family. There's a loss of trust. There's now, as a result of the dwindling of resources, there could be neglect where children now can't pay their fees, they can't get the wherewithal to go to school, the household is left. You have to, there's a range of deprivations as a result of what is happening. And indeed, there's an increase in emotional pain, not only for the person who's gambling, but for the people around them who depend on them for their support and so on. Now, there's also the whole question of crime and social harm, because illegal gambling is associated with fraud. We have had all these kinds of Ponzi schemes. We have heard about where people lost a lot of money, even what appeared to be um, genuine, well respected finance houses. We have had in Trinidad the Clico debacle, and we had the there are several of them that don't. Some of them don't come to mind right now. You know, some credit unions. I don't want to mention the name. And then there's of course organized crime around gambling. We have seen that. I mean, in the old days, you have films that are being made now with Al Capone and these fellas. And these can lead to community instability as well, generally, because it can have wide ranging impact. Now, let us look at some of the ways people gamble. The easy access, gambling opportunities are everywhere. from the punters who pass and collect the bet to go to the playway banker at lunchtime. And they're betting twice a day, lunchtime and evening, even in my community here. And there's especially among vulnerable individuals and youth, there are people who are superstitious in our society. I mean, it is intergenerational where you grow up with your family talking about superstition and so on. And it is ingrained in them. I am aware of families that believe in obia and black magic and all of that. And all of these things lead to a feeling that, look, I could do my little simmy and so on or whatever and win today. And so that there's a lot of paraphernalia, people use, they have their lucky coin and they have their little rabbit foot and they have, you know, little signs and signals that just get up in the morning and they analyze, I dreamed this and I dreamed that. And I remember a close relative nearby here, this little boy, whatever it was alleged or whatever he dreamed, he they were able to use the dream to literally win the mark. But on those occasions when they followed his dream and they lost, he had to hide, And can you imagine what this is doing to this little child, And so, yes, it creates community where everybody, pass in the morning as soon as 8, 9 o'clock before they start to go to punt and they talk to their friends, they call on the phone, who is a good mark to play today, boy? And the playway system has come up with 36 marks that each one of them signify a certain, um, is represented by some symbol, or a creature, dog and cat and frappo and in the culture here. And that becomes the talking point for the morning until they put their bed. And so that let us look at why gambling becomes so addictive. Gambling affects the brain's reward system through dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical that is found in the brain that is really responsible for making us feel happy. So that if you went to church and you sang and or you just received a compliment or an award and you feel happy, it is because your brain released a little bit of dopamine. And so too, when you sit down and you're waiting for the National Lotteries Control Board to declare what was the mark today, or the punter to come back and say, well, look, they played 32 and you played that mark. Wow, you have a surge of dopamine. And then you go boasting and bragging to all your friends and your family about, look, I put in just this small amount and look how much I have. But the truth is, you don't have many gamblers who speak about when they lose. It's very kept very quiet. They can't even ventilate. Look, boy, I lost so much of money and I'm feeling sad. Or no, they have to keep it all in because people are going to reproach them, or make fun of them, or, talk down to them. So that wins create pleasure, but losses create the urge to continue because you want to win it back. It's called chasing. And then, strange enough, near misses, they create false hope. Gosh, I wanted to play 32, man. And I changed my mind. I should have played it 32. And there's this debate going on. So much of valuable mental energy is wasted when you lose the bet at lunchtime. You didn't only lose your money, you lost your whole morning. I want people to pay attention to this because whereas you could have been sitting talking to your children, your spouse, planting something in the garden, or doing something creative, thinking about how to solve one of life's problems, reading a good book, learning from something, or looking at a program like this, for instance. You were sitting there analyzing why the black cat crossed the road and or why this, or why I dreamt that, and talking to her and wasting your whole morning. And then the same thing happens in the evening again because they're playing this thing more than once for the day. And then you have those scratch cards that you can buy at all the time. You don't even have to wait till lunchtime. As soon as you make up the money, you run to the booth and you buy the card and you scratch it to see what is behind it there for you. So that these near misses, it creates a kind of false hope that causes you to continue to chase, to win. So over time, the brain adapts to this. It looks forward to this. And your control that I spoke about earlier on, that you used to be able to be, responsible and not waste money and all of that, it starts to weaken and depreciate. And gambling at this stage becomes compulsive because when you're not gambling, you're in the dumps, you feel depressed. But when you put a bet, what happens? Your pulse rate starts to go up because your adrenaline, as it nearing lunchtime, when the bet would be declared, you'd find if you took the blood pressure of all of these punters who put their money there, you'd see starting to get elevated. Now, that has health complications for your heart as well, for high blood pressure patients, for old people, and all of that. So that gambling has a tremendous effect on your health, your state of mind. Now, this is why addiction is not simply about being weak willed. And a lot of family members who do not understand this, so "But he just hardened, he just don't listen. Look, he just lost the money. Money that was supposed to pay the light bill, gone. Money that was supposed to pay the medical bills, no longer there. When you go to the bank for the saving, it's empty. You're in overdraft. So it is a condition that changes thinking and behavior. The person's actual way of reasoning things changes over time. They don't see it. So that I want to give some of the warning signs for family members and relatives. What are some of the warning signs of gambling addiction? That is spending more money than was intended. These are warning signs because people who gamble is like they lose the value of money. Then borrowing or selling possessions. These are all hidden signs that this person probably gambling. When a person come to you to borrow money, clearly they are saying, I have not been able to handle my finances properly. I am very, very reluctant to lend money to anyone because I've had bad experiences, you know, because people who coming to borrow money, clearly they have not been able to handle the finances well. So that if they can't handle the finances well, they may not be able to pay you back when they borrow. Then lying about gambling habits, that is a clear sign of addiction when you have to lie about it. If you're just gambling recreationally and it's not a problem, then yeah, boy, I went and I put in a $20 and okay, I lost it. But when you have to start lying to your relatives and so on, it means that you're covering up. You are already recognizing that it is a problem and you can't seem to stop yourself. Neglecting work or family responsibilities is another sign that you are becoming addicted and dependent on gambling. And then feeling restless or irritable when unable to gamble. That is a almost like confirmation that no, and I know people who sacrifice work, they sacrifice career, they sacrifice family life, and now they're just spending their time totally. And yes, the gambling houses, they they offer so much incentives. And I don't gamble. I only hear this by the way. You get free food, you get free drinks. Some gambling houses even offering you a place to stay overnight free. You understand? And then, of course, they include in that women dressed in a very seductive manner, and some of them actually prostituting themselves in these gambling houses. They use that place to go and pick up friends and prostitute themselves. So there's a whole lot of other addictions that are possibly tied in with this that one has to look at. These signs should never be ignored because from, unlike other addictions, it is very difficult to tell if somebody is gambling initially. So, at this stage, I want to tell a story, you know, that I think brings the point home. And this is a story that is well known, I know, in the Hindu community, but it has international bearing. And this is a story that a lesson from the Mahabharata actually, which is one of the Hindu epics. So that it is ancient but deeply relevant today. From the Mahabharata, there are two royal families. The Pandavas, that was led by Yudhishthir, and then there's the Kauravas, that was led by Duryodhan. Yudhishthir was a respected and wise and honorable man. He was the head of the Pandavas, but he had one weakness, and that weakness was gambling. He liked to gamble. So Duryodhan, along with his uncle Shakuni, invited a Yudhishthir to a game of dice. At first, it seemed harmless, but the game was rigged. And still, although Yudhishthir knew the game was rigged, because of his addiction, he still continued playing. Of course, he lost. First, he lost his wealth. Then he gambled his kingdom. He lost that. Then he wagered his brothers as well. He put them on the table, as it were. And then he said he put himself as well, and he lost. He lost his wealth, his kingdom, his brothers, and himself. And when he had nothing else, finally he gambled his wife Draupadi, and he lost her too. And the Kauravas always had this vendetta against the Pandavas, this envy and this jealousy for them of them. And they decided they were going to take revenge and they were going to humiliate Draupadi in the open court. And some of you know the story. They tried to disrobe her. And of course, she was saved by God. But all the relationships that they had before that was shattered. And all because one man could not stop gambling. Think about that. The whole family, the whole kingdom, everything was lost because of one man's addiction to gambling. That one game led to exile. They had to go in exile, and eventually it led to the Great War that the Mahabharata is about, really, that records. It's called the Kurukshetra War. This was a devastating war that destroyed generations, and even the winners suffered deeply. The lesson is timeless. Gambling begins small, but when left unchecked, it can take everything you have: money, property, your self respect, your family, and everything. So let us look at the human side of gambling addiction. One of the greatest dangers of gambling addiction is that it is often invisible. Unlike alcohol or drugs, there may be no smell. Alcoholic drink, you could actually smell. Even if you take one beer, I had a wife who tell me, I know every time he drink, he didn't notice, but when he's sleeping and I sleeping next to him and he starts to his breath deep down from him, you could smell the beer. He will sweat it sometimes. So sometimes with alcohol and these other addictions, you can literally see and smell and have an idea that the person drank. But in gambling, there's no obvious physical signs. In fact, people become much more comical and lighthearted, and they present themselves unhelpful and caring and all that to cover up the other side so that you wouldn't suspect them. So that There's no dramatic public behavior. The gambler doesn't fall down, get drunk, and get charged by the police. Or the alcoholic, the gambler does not have all of these physical symptoms like the other drug users. Many people struggling with gambling addiction, they go to work every day. They appear normal in public and they hide their suffering very quietly, as I said. When they're losing or they're betting and losing, and they have all that juggling between the loan sharks and all that, they have to keep all of this to themselves. They can't let anybody close to them know because of the consequences it could cause. But internally, they may be overwhelmed by debt. They will become depressed. They become anxious. They're always living in fear and in shame. So some people begin gambling to escape loneliness. You're alone, and it is reported in the United States. A lot of these people who are retired and they're living long now because of the medical treatment and so on, they're on their pensions, but they are lonely. They are in emptiness. The children are all married and gone, and they are just alone in the house. The single father now or the mother. And so they go to these clubs, they go to these diners, they wherever, casinos, and they sit down and they spend the day. They get food and they get companionship, but they lose all their money. And sometimes they invest against their properties. They borrow against their properties, and they eventually lose their properties. So that some people they gamble to deal with loneliness, some to deal with stress, others to deal with emotional pain. You know, you've been married for all these years and then one partner dies. And that's a very difficult thing to deal with, especially when you do not have your children with you now or a support system. And we are moving away from that rural community where neighbors and all of that lived in close harmony. Now we're all in cities. We don't even talk to the neighbors anymore. Even if when we talk on the phone. There isn't any face-to-face contact. So that could lead and perpetuate gambling and then financial pressure, always trying to win back. And I know someone who has workers working for them, but is gambling and has going to the casino to try to win money to pay the workers their salary. Well, I think if you, every one of you will understand what will happen over time. You lose your business, but eventually gambling creates even greater suffering. Many families in Trinidad and Tobago are silently carrying this burden. A lot of us don't know this, but I know people very close to me here. One person who was in a very senior position in the government service, who had responsibility for the cash in the accounting system, who found a way to take the money and gamble and eventually rigged up millions of dollars in debt, in losses, and eventually was discovered. And that was a debacle. The person lost the job and has to find a way to pay it back or go to jail. And this was a female from a respectable family. Family had to pull together all sell property and do all kinds of things to prevent the shame further. So that's a long story. But of course, many families, as I said, in Trinidad and Tobago are silently carrying this because there's missed bills, bills not being paid, financial instability, mortgage not being serviced. Then there's family conflict over this all the time, you know. And then there's the hidden debt that I spoke about, that even spouses are unaware of. And because gambling is socially accepted in many circles, people often delay seeking help until the damage becomes very, very severe. And I see this, and this is why compassion matters. It is important you listening to this program today understand that this is an illness, that you need to have compassion for the person if you are going to be able to help them. But to be able to help them, first you need to understand what you're dealing with. And this is what this program is about. A gambling addict is not simply careless. Many are trapped in a cycle of shame, despair, and compulsion. And recovery begins when people feel safe enough to ask for help. But how will that happen? First, you have to know where to go. Now, there are a few resources. I will touch on them before we end the program, but not as prolific as Alcohol Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and so on. We need to have more Gamblers Anonymous groups in Trinidad, but people are not coming out and talking about it because these would be the people who would have to start their group. People who have recognized they had a gambling problem and are willing to do something. And if there's any amount of gamblers here, or people who would like to do something, I'm volunteering to assist. If you would like to start a group, a few of you get together, I will do everything to help you because we need this just like we have Alcoholics Anonymous, we need more Gamblers Anonymous groups. I knew there used to be a group in Port of Spain, but it seemed to be a very select group. We need more at the grassroots level. But more about that later on. And recovery begins when people feel safe enough to ask for help, as I said. Now, there are solutions, there are helplines and recovery resources. The good news is this, that help is available and recovery is possible. Not as much as I would like personally, but yes, there's for the individual, there's personal responsibility to set strict money and time limits if you're going to gamble. In fact, I would like to say that if a person realizes, look, I have become addicted to gambling, the one way to stop is to stop completely. Just like alcoholism, just like other drugs, just like smoking, you know, it is very difficult to taper off these things because once you make that one bet, if you win, you get encouraged to continue. If you lose, you want to win it back. If you nearly win, well, worse again. You're going to try, and see if you could get it right. So that, again, if you want to stop gambling, you have to avoid gambling environments. If you don't go there, just like drinking, if you don't want to drink, you don't want to get messed up with blood, don't go hang around the butcher stall. You have to replace gambling with healthy activities. Find other things to do to keep your mind occupied and away from gambling. Now, treatment may include counseling. I have done, I have counseled several people with gambling addiction, most of them successfully. There is also what you call CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And alongside that, you have to have financial counseling because a lot of people, by the time they come forward for help, they have racked up a lot of financial problems, financial mismanagement, and they need to find ways now how to repay all of this, how to restructure loans and all of that. Um, of course, support groups, like I mentioned before, Gamblers Anonymous provide peer support and structured recovery. And they use the same 12 steps that Alcoholics Anonymous use and Narcotics Anonymous use. All of these anonymous groups use the same 12 steps of recovery. And I will probably do another program on 12 step soon so that a lot of you who hear step 12 step work and all of that will understand what it is about. There are some numbers here that I could give out after the program. Confidential emotional support and crisis intervention resources. There are hotlines. I will just mention them at this point. There's 800-5588. That is 800-5588. There's 866-5433. 866-5433, and there's 220-3636. 220-3636. There's also organizations like Families in Action. I know they provide addiction counseling and family support, and their hotline is 628-2333. You can call me after if you didn't get it down. 628-2333. And then there's also support for children and young people, hotlines in Trinidad that could not only deals with gambling addiction, but other issues. Hotlines like 131 800 4321, 800 4321. Yeah. And then there's the mental health and counseling services. There's cognitive personal development, mental health services available at various psychiatric clinics in Trinidad and Tobago. There are services that are provided. There's a Chaguanas Mental Health Clinic, which is not too far from where I am. And they provide counseling not only for gamblers, but other addictions and other family issues and so on. Counseling generally, family therapy. There's also a similar clinic at Barataria Mental Health and Wellness Center that provide counseling services. And there's one in Port of Spain at the Pembroke Street Mental Health Wellness Center. These centers are there that provide counseling service to the public. These are supported by the government and so on. And then there's rehabilitation and recovery services. I saw it online, Sakina Recovery Center. There is New Life Ministries Drug Rehabilitation Center. There's the Arima Rehabilitation Center. And of course, there's the Tobago Rehabilitation and Empowerment Center. I know I did some training with the staff there, trained some of the staff there initially when that center was started. And I want to say that recovery is possible and there is hope. Recovery from gambling addiction is possible. The person has just have to have a desire. Now, how do you get that desire? The desire comes from honestly looking at the role of gambling in your life. You know, the truth is the gambling houses, the dice is always loaded in their favor, like happened with Sakuni and Duryodhana and Yudhishthir in the story I talk about. We know that you really can't win them. If we were winning, if the punters, the people betting were winning, then the National Lotteries Control Board would have bust down, as we say in Trinidad, would have gone out of existence long ago. Will not have been able to amass millions of dollars that they can now give little pittances to NGOs to justify their existence, I would say, in my opinion. So that check in your own life, those of you who are listening this morning and who have been gambling, I mean, really, have you really been able to win and sustain winning? This is why you have to be honest with yourself. If you are really honest, you'd realize, hey, no, and this money could have been put to so much good use. I remember once driving, I had a Suzuki van and I was driving to Balandra Beach. And near Komoto there, I saw this lady with this bag of bottles on the side of the road, flagging down the vehicle, and the rain was drizzling. I stopped and picked her up, and she said she was going to Valencia Junction. She had this bag with bottles in it, about a half bag, and we got into conversation. And she told me that, they were very poor, husband was not working, and she was now going to sell these bottles. And I thought she would use it. She said she had to buy some groceries. But in the conversation, what she did say, she was going to sell the bottles, she was going to take the money and go and play a mark first and win. When she win, then she was going to buy the groceries and all of that. So I said, but if you lost, she said, no, no, no. Today is my lucky day. I know I'm going to win. That is the mental state of a addictive gambler, you know? So that recovery from gambling of addiction is possible, but a person has to have insight. And that insight could come from counseling, from family support. So they and their own level of honesty. Once you realize you have a problem, it is causing problems in your life, and you can't seem to stop. You're having financial problems, conflict, and all of those things. It's time to stop. So once you have a desire to stop, I can show you how to do it. The various 12-step programs can guarantee that you would stop. Because people, if they stop, they are able to rebuild their finances, they are able to rebuild their emotional health, They're also able to restore their relationships gradually, and their dignity comes with time. Once you stop gambling, these things are possible. But recovery begins with honesty. You have to be honest, and you have to be honest with yourself. That is the first step, is often admitting that, look, I am no longer in control, that this thing is causing problems in my life. You know, so too with drinking. If you're drinking and it's not causing any problems, then you're not addicted. If you're gambling and it's not causing financial problems, conflict, and all of that, maybe you're not. But once it is causing problems in your life and you are aware of it and you still continue, that is definitely a sign of addiction. So that no one should recover alone. You alone can do it, but you can't do it alone. And this is why counseling matters, support groups matter, and family support matters. These will be the things that will help you to stop, not only stop, but stay stop for the long haul. Many recovering gamblers say the greatest freedom was not winning money, it was escaping the constant fear, pressure, and obsession to gamble. So that finally, I want to say that gambling is not merely about money. It is about choices. It is about control. It is about consequences. You have to be honest and see, you have to start thinking consequentially. When I invest, what are the choices I'm making? Every one of you listening to this program this morning, who you are, where you are, how you are, is based on the choices you have made. If you are not in a good place, and forget about gambling and addiction and all of those, if you are not in a place where you like, you're comfortable, you are happy, and where you think you should be, you need to go back and look at what are the choices you have made that led to where you are. And you have to examine them rigorously under the microscope, you know, being honest with yourself so that you correct those things. You also have to look at, whether you have control or not. How many times you tell yourself, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to bet $5 or $10, but you ended up betting more. And then most important is look at the consequences that it has caused to you in the past. How many times money that could have been spent for other purposes in the house, to buy the children's shoes, the books, take the family for holiday and all of that. How much of all of that was funneled into your supporting your gambling addiction? And you also have to look at it is, as I said, gambling is not only about money. It is about choices, control, consequences, but also sometimes it is about survival, you know. So the Mahabharata teaches us that even wise people can fall when weakness goes unchecked. Let me read that again. Wise people can fall when weaknesses go unchecked. Modern life teaches us the same lesson every day, but there is another truth. People can recover, families can heal, lives can be rebuilt. So if you're someone, if you are someone, or you know someone who is struggling with gambling addiction, you need to reach out, speak up, don't sit quietly, and seek help. Talk to somebody if you have a problem. And of course, I am available. The numbers are on your screen. You can text me at 768-5925, or you can call at 671-3040. If you have a drinking problem, a drinking or a drug or gambling problem, any addiction problem. In fact, I also do marital counseling. I do counseling generally, so that you need to seek help. Because the greatest victory is not winning the gambling. Your greatest victory is not winning the gamble, but it is winning back your life after you have reached to becoming dependent. So, again, let me remind all our listeners this program is going to be repeated tonight at 10 on radio and TV Jagriti. It is also going to be posted in a short while on YouTube and Facebook. So, those of you who do not have or miss some part of the program or who would like to use it as a resource, send a link to someone who you believe or suspect is having a problem with alcoholism, drug addiction, gambling, smoking, whatever. You can send, there's a whole list of programs on them in my channel. You can access all the programs that have been done for more than over the last 2, 3 years on Ramnaresh Dwarika, Addiction and Recovery in YouTube and Facebook. And you can access all the programs. There are programs there on alcoholism, drug addiction, and every aspect of drug addiction, the various different types of addiction. On last occasion, we spoke about vaping, I've spoken about gambling, I've spoken about cocaine, marijuana, alcohol, you name it. And I've spoken about the resources that are available. And of course, if you can't find it there, you can call me at the numbers on your screen. And as I said, if there's anyone who would like, if you know someone or a group of people who would like to stop gambling or smoking, or you organize yourself, or any organization that would like me to come and speak to their audiences on these subjects, I'd be quite willing to do that. All you have to do is to get in touch with me and I'd be happy to do that. So I want to thank Radio and TV Jagriti for providing this airtime free of charge every week. As a responsible corporate citizen, I want to thank the people in the radio and television station, like Jason Kalu, Bimal Ramdani, and all the support staff, especially Mr. Vijay Maharaj, who is the CEO of Radio and TV Jagriti, and who have been providing this resource as a community service. And, I just want to say that, my greatest admiration for this radio and television station in that they have taken a principal position to forego a lot of finances that they could have been making by advertising rum and cigarette and all of those things like some other radio and television stations. But they have done that in the interest of the national community, not only the East Indian community, but all our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Tobago and worldwide. So I want to thank them again. And I want to thank all of you who have been listening and following the program and sending in your compliments and recommendations and encouragement over the years. I want to thank you very much. And again, and until next week, Thursday, when we will also have another program. In the meantime, you can send in any questions that you might have to text it to me, and I will make every effort to include it in the the future programs. So I want to thank you again, and until next week, Thursday, I am Ram Naresh Dwarika. Again, bidding you farewell and goodbye until next week, Thursday.